sure that we're doing all right. All right, so we are back to Freud, and we have talked extensively about his life a little bit there. So we did, I think, picked up, we were talking about life and death instincts, talked about the levels of consciousness. Here's what I wanted to pick up with the structure of personality. When we talk about the structure of personality, we're talking almost like about the frame of a house. So think of your personality as being a house. So the walls are going to be the id, the ego, and the superego, according to Freud. Now, a little bit more specific about the id. As we know, it's a reservoir of that aggression and sex instinct, and that instinct is very biological in nature, that Freud was significantly influenced by Darwin, that essentially talked about survival of the species, although he didn't coin that term, or survival of the fittest. He was talking about adaptation, and adaptation occurring through those instincts of life and death, sex for procreation, aggression for death of competition. All right, so the id itself, kind of like that, angel on one side, devil on the other, with the devil being the id and the angel being the superego, and the poor little ego in the middle trying to balance out the stress and, that comes from the competition, essentially, between those two, trying to control the personality and the person. All right, so the id is based upon the pleasure principle. Pleasure principle is just as it sounds: pursue pleasure, avoid pain. It is a primary process thinking, and what I mean by the primary process thinking, it's very infantile type of thinking. I want what I want when I want it, and I'm going to get it type of attitude there. All right. So hang on a minute here. Okay, so I want what I want when I want it. And then the ego is based upon the reality principle. What does that mean? That means that the ego knows what the rules, the standards, the norms, acceptable behavior is out in the real world. It operates on a secondary process thinking. In other words, it's thinking about, yes, this may be what I want, but here are the rules to kind of govern that decision making. Then there's the superego, very internalized values about morality. It's your conscience, kind of think of it that way. It's the ego ideal. Ego ideal. In other words, it's the most idealized, abstract kind of point of view surrounding about what morality should be. And that's why I oftentimes say it's very puritanical. All right, that doesn't have that there. So conflict. The ego is constantly in conflict between that id and that superego. And thereby produces anxieties, and three anxieties that Freud talks about: neurotic, reality, and moral anxiety. The neurotic anxiety is the id versus the ego. The reality anxiety is exactly those very tangible, seeable dangers, and the moral anxiety is the id versus the superego. Now, in response to those anxieties, we develop defenses, and as I said, we're constantly trying to pursue equilibrium versus growth. We're just trying to compensate for that anxiety. So in other words, we are nothing but just a ball of anxiety, according to Freud. And so it's very pessimistic, in other words, not very optimistic kind of theory. So those defense mechanisms are simply ego strategies that the ego is using to defend against that anxiety. And it is provoked daily by everyday conflict. It's provoked by denials or distortions of reality. And there's about 8 of them that we typically study: repression, unconscious removal from awareness; denial, denying the existence of a threat; reaction formation, expression of the opposite impulse; projection, attributing a disturbing impulse to someone else; regression, let me retreat to an earlier period of life; rationalization, let me reinterpret that behavior in a more positive light; displacement, shift that impulse to a very suitable object, like maybe shopping, maybe obsessive basketball playing, etc. Sublimation, displacing that impulse into very socially acceptable behavior, taking that aggression kind of streak and putting it, into professional basketball or sports of some sort. We go through psychosexual stages. Now, remember, I said that all personality theories are either continuous or discontinuous. And discontinuous means that we're doing like stair steps, stages of development that usually have ages attached to them. So our personality is developing in stages, and each stage is going to then be defined by that erogenous zone. Now, what's an erogenous zone? It's a zone in our body where we take very great pleasure in trying to satisfy that pleasure principle, those energies that are boiling up from our unconscious, from the id. And it, in every stage, has a conflict that we're moving through in order to move to the next stage. And so that conflict is, how do I deal with all that energy that's boiling up into that erogenous zone? So, for example, if we take the oral stage of psychosexual development, our erogenous zone is our mouth. So we're really into sucking, we're really into breastfeeding. Maybe we suck on our toes or hands, somebody else's fingers, etc. That's how persistent and pervasive and strong that impulse and instinct is, energy from that's rising up. So now what happens is that if that gets thwarted, we are removed from the breast too soon, removed from the passy too soon, we're scolded for sucking our toes or fingers, etc. That then causes a person to somewhat get fixated because we're not resolving how to move through that expression of that energy, the experience of that energy, etc. And so we get really excessively frustrated, excessively in need of gratification. And so portions of that libido, that sex and aggression, stay really heavily tied into that particular stage. So in other words, how does it mean that we always suck on our toes even when we're 35? No, that just simply means that we are still fixated on that oral gratification, and it comes through other types of behaviors, like maybe we're sarcastic, maybe we chew a lot of gum, maybe we chew on an eraser, maybe we just have a biting sense of humor, So part of our libido stays invested in that particular stage, depending upon how we move through that stage and the influence. Who's that being influenced by? Well, again, we go back to mother-child relationship. Mom is breastfeeding, mom is making the decision about the passing, mom is typically holding with regards to sucking on, the baby while they're sucking on their toes or their hands or her hands. So how does she respond to that? Does she actually cause, as per Freud, cause the person to just stay conflicted there because of her response and reaction to that, and thereby causing part of that libido to stay there? So here are the 5 stages: oral, anal, phallic, latent, and genital. Let's break those down. As we said, the age is birth to 1 for oral stage, we think. Characteristics: mouth, as I said, is primary erogenous zone. Pleasure is derived from sucking, that pleasure principle. It is dominant. Now, what happens if we are thwarted and we get some of that libido kind of stuck there? We can be oral incorporative and oral aggressive. In other words, incorporative, excessive concern with oral activities, i.e. maybe eating disorder. Oral aggressive, excessive pessimism, excessive aggressiveness. And you'll notice that the resolution of these stages is not positive as he discusses these psychosexual stages. All right, anal stage, 1 to 3. Characteristic is the anus is primary erogenous zone. Toilet training interferes with the gratification of defecating. Release, in other words. Types of personality characteristics that we can get: anal retentive, anal aggressive. Anal retentive is rigid, stubborn, stingy. Anal aggressive, cruel, destructive tantrums. There's a bleach commercial on television now where the little boy goes to the bathroom in the bathtub and mom has this panicked look, and then she launches into cleaning with her bleach. So what then might that cause personality characteristics? Let's say she scolds and she cleans with bleach. What might we see develop from that little boy in that situation? Does he become destructive? Does he become rigid? Does he have very, very specific cleaning obsessions with bleach? That's how Freud would lean towards the explanation there. All right, phallic stage is birth to 1. Characteristics: our genitals are primary erogenous zones. Superego development. This is Oedipus complex, electric complex for girls. So what's going on there? Boys are experiencing a concern with castration anxiety. Girls are experiencing a concern with penis envy. In fact, in reading some of Horney's work, I'm enlightened a little bit more to understand that Freud, really kind of a sexist, very puritanical 1800s kind of point of view, saw women as actually experiencing truly an injury to their body because they were born without a penis. And so that it becomes a destroyed cavity of some sort, as if they were mutilated, at birth. And that then becomes an obsession for them because they don't have a penis there. They become obsessed with that destroyed, mutilated part of their body, and thereby develop all those symptoms of hysteria and histrionics, i.e. PMS, that Freud saw as very mentally ill and beyond help, really and truly. And he said the only way that that can be satisfied is that she just essentially remain pregnant and have as her primary goal the upbringing of children. So that's that kind of very sexist attitude. So what's going on during the Oedipus complex? This is where dad steps in terms of the father-child relationship becoming important. And the objective, of course, excuse my dog. And the objective here is to begin to affiliate and to identify in a normal fashion boys to father versus boys' sexual obsession with mother. And same thing for girls. Girls to father appropriate relationship with father versus girls' sexual obsession with mom. So that's what's going on in those complexes, and hopefully we'll get to explain those a little bit more in depth later. All right, age 5. This is puberty. This is latency period. Really not a true stage of development, but really kind of a cooling down kind of period, a period of rest. Sex instincts are sublimated into school activities, hobbies, sports, and the focus is on same-sex friendships. So we're really kind of cooling our jets during this time there versus obsessing about sex and body parts. Then we fall out of, back up here. Okay, then we fall out of the latency period into, that's not correct. This is actually continuing, adolescence, adulthood. So we're conforming, this is more of the latency period. Conforming to societal sanctions of sexual expression, finding satisfaction in our love and our work, and from finding committed relationships. So let's back up. Oral, anal, phallic, latent, in that last stage when we were talking about adulthood, that actually is mislabeled. That should be the genital stage. Okay, so latency period, we are cooling off. Genital stage is when we're forming those normal, healthy relationships, adult relationships. Okay, so that's a mislabeling on that. All right, so we are answering those questions about this theory. Is it deterministic? Where does it fall with nature-nurture influences? Where is it focused with past-present, uniqueness versus universality, growth, or equilibrium, or pessimistic versus optimistic? So it's very much a determinism-based theory. It does have both nature and nurture influences. It's quite heavy on the past focus. It does talk about both uniqueness and universality because we're unique in terms of our own relationships with our mother-child, father-child, but it's universal in that we all have an Oedipus complex, electric complex, go through these same psychosexual stages, have the same instincts, struggle with the id and the superego, have defense mechanisms, etc. Growth can occur only through psychoanalysis. Without psychoanalysis, you're simply doing compensatory behavior and pursuing equilibrium. It is absolutely quite pessimistic as a theory. Now, how does Freud go about assessing the needs here, getting and tapping into your Oedipus complex, getting and tapping into your id, etc.? It occurs through free association, dream analysis. Free association, say whatever comes to your mind. Whatever comes to your mind, they may give you a stimulus word, and you say whatever comes to your mind. Dream analysis is an interpretation of your unconscious content. In other words, you would lay on Freud's couch and you would tell him about the dreams because he believed that dreams were the pathway to the unconscious. You might go into some type of cathartic kind of experience where you express the emotions that you may have long held against your mother or your father. Your resistance is definitely going to be interpreted by the psychoanalyst as to being a block to expression, and you're going to be doing the work to that resistance. The manifest and the latent content are both going to be examined. The manifest content are the actual dream events that you can relay, verbalize, and the latent content then is going to be the symbolic meaning interpretations by the psychoanalyst of that. Now, where did his research come from? Primarily case studies, through a detailed history of his individuals that he did see, Now, the problem with case studies, obviously, we know is reliability and validity. And some of his concepts that he used in his theories were very difficult to operationalize and turn into very measurable kind of research. Research findings have seen that catharsis does not really reduce negative emotions. Mixed results for repressed memories of childhood sexual abuse. In the 1970s, we went through some horrible, horrible sexual abuse cases that hit national news that were based upon repressed memories and therapist interpretation of repressed memories. Well, based upon the fact that Freud had no research to support that idea of dream interpretation and memory interpretation, those therapists that used the repressed memories to remove children from homes and to claim child sexual abuse, etc., really basically ruined careers and was an incredibly poor choice on their part and lack of knowledge of this whole idea of Freud's of repressed memories. There is some support in research for unconscious ego control, resiliency, displacement, repression, denial, rejection. We certainly believe that dreams can reflect emotional concerns. There is some research to show, obviously, aggressive instinct, and actually research to show that there's some truth to Freudian slips, that we, in other words, engage in Freudian slips with our teachers, with our friends, etc. Now, there are extensions to Freud's theory. Anna Freud, his daughter, his beloved first daughter, I believe, was his selected protege within his family. His other selected protege was Carl Jung. They had a significant falling out, though, and you can read the letters between Freud and Jung and how much they fought over fame and fortune and status, as well as just trying to propagate their individual theories. So Anna Freud comes along and she says, let's not really concentrate strongly on the id as much as her father did, but let's look at the ego. And so she expands the idea of the ego, refines the idea of ego defense mechanisms, expands Freud's use of clinical psychology, expands its use with children, develops child play therapy, and really quite famous in her own regard with regards to child work. The theory now, where is the concentration of psychodynamic theory? It's not psychoanalytic theory so much as it's psychodynamic, and that word dynamic is actually really quite significant. It reflects a very significant change in the theory's development. So what's it concentrating now on? It's still Freudian in its basic approach, but it really kind of focuses on an expanded set of relationships. Object relations theory is what it really is called now. Object relations theory. In other words, where do you put your energy into your relationships, and what does that look like in those dynamics in those relationships? There are two other theorists that have come along after Anna Freud, and that's Heinz Kohut and Melanie Klein. And they talk about the nuclear self and the mother acting as a mirror, not as a sex or object of sexual desire. Klein talks about that infants do have an inner life and that they do have relationships that they form early on through breastfeeding there. So their theories are worth consideration, and they're a little bit more substantiated beyond case studies. Now, there are contributions that Freud's theory absolutely makes. There is this inescapable force within us. Lots of contemporary psychology has adopted his ideas like defense mechanisms and resistance. And Freud was definitely a pioneer in personality theory. So we don't need to really look at his theory too negatively, but to also recognize that, like any theory, there are both benefits and there are also the good points as well as the bad points, let's say. So what's the criticism? Psychoanalysis it takes years of therapy. You're analyzed for years, and it's very, very costly. Too much emphasis on biology, determinism, and sex, and the terms are very ambiguous and really only known true meaning and interpreted through Freud, and some of his work has actually been misinterpreted because of the translation, or its translation, I believe, from Viennese or German to English.